So, hi, I'm Grace, and I did the project Spreading Kindness Through Sign for my Girl Scout Gold Award. So I'm going to bring you through the process of what before, during, and after my presentation to the classes sort of was like. After my Gold Award is approved, so I'm going to start after my Gold Award is approved. Before I even talk to anybody, I work at a camp over the summer, and I wanted to make sure that it was a doable project, that fifth graders could actually learn sign language and that it was a reasonable thing to teach. And so I taught my fourth and fifth grade campers the Star Spangled Banner just to make sure that they could pick up sign language sort of at a good speed, measure how fast they could pick it up, that kind of thing. So I taught them the Star Spangled Banner at camp, sort of just feel out the waters of teaching a child sign language. And then I went in October to Pyle Middle School, which is my feeder middle school into Whitman, which is my high school, and I taught the sixth graders sign language. I brought them through a very similar lesson, not exactly the same, but a similar lesson to the one I taught to the fifth graders, just to make sure that it was doable, it was enjoyed. I wanted to sort of test out the waters beforehand. So after that, I then worked with my principal to draft up an email to the principals at all of the feeder elementary schools that go into my high school. So because I go to a public high school, there are 8 elementary schools that feed into the middle school, and the middle school feeds into my high school. So I emailed every single feeder elementary school, and I'll attach what it looked like at the end of this video, what my email looked like. So I did that, and then I explained to them sort of what my project was, what spreading kindness through sign really meant, that kind of thing. And I heard back from Mr. Morrison, who is the 5th grade team leader at Burning Tree Elementary School, and he said, we would love it. We have 5 classes. When can you come in? So we sort of worked that out. And so I agreed to come in. I taught all 5 classes. So after sort of setting up when I was going to do my project, I then moved on to what exactly was I going to teach, because I had sort of 2 big ideas. I wanted to teach sign language, and I wanted to explain why kindness was important and sort of arc them together. Why kindness and sign language go together, that kind of thing. So I had to figure out exactly what I wanted to teach, because I had 30 minutes to teach these 5th graders, so what was important, that kind of thing. And so I talked to my sign language teacher from last year, and I worked it out in a way that I thought was going to be the best, and I'll go through the signs that I taught and sort of the lesson plan, the way I did it, that kind of thing. And then after I worked that out, I wrote it out onto a big poster board so that the class could read it, and then I could read it, so we both were understanding what was coming, just because that was something I knew that in elementary school I really liked to know what I was going to be taught. So I wrote that out, and I will bring you through exactly what I did. So while I was developing my lesson plan, I did some research on the psychological benefits of having an inclusive environment. I also did some research on teaching kids in a kinesthetic way, what the advantage of that is, as well as working with my best buddy through the club at my school to figure out what range of sign language could be taught. So what is the easiest to pick up, what is the hardest to pick up, that kind of thing. So I could sort of tailor around that, because there are kids of every need and this and that. So I wanted to make sure it was accessible to everybody. So I did that while I was developing my lesson plan. And within my lesson plan, I knew I wanted to teach them sign language, and I knew I wanted to teach them about kindness. I knew I wanted to talk about the deaf community, but I wasn't exactly sure how to tie it all together. And so I think the thing that really got me was I wanted to make sure it was not just me standing up there talking to them. I wanted it to be very back and forth between us, because when I worked with the 6th graders, they wanted to ask questions and they wanted to answer my questions. They were less engaged when I was just standing up there talking. So I took that for what I had learned earlier, and I sort of put it into my lesson plan of I want to have it as a back and forth. So the main part of my lesson plan was just developing questions, leading questions that I could ask so that I could engage everyone and then sort of put in my 2 cents after they've answered. And so I developed that. And then I went into the classrooms. The first classroom I went into was a gen ed regular 5th grade class at Burning Tree. And it was very nerve-wracking. So if you're scared, it's very normal. When I walked into the first classroom, I didn't say anything. I signed. I was like, it's nice to meet you. But without saying so. And I said, can everybody do that? And then I explained to them what I meant, and then I introduced myself. And introduced why I was there, that kind of thing. Told them what we were going to be learning about. Showed them my lesson plan. And then I taught them, how are you? And the responses to that. Sort of as greetings and like, hi, what's your name? So we learn greetings first before going into sort of the more serious parts about the kindness and that kind of thing. We did just sort of the basics of greeting somebody. Because again, part of being kind to somebody is acknowledging them, greeting them, politely talking to them. And so that's how we started the lesson. Within my original lesson plan, I had planned on having a chart paper be passed around, having the kids write kind phrases, and then teaching them those phrases that they had come up with. But as I got started in the classroom and realized how verbally engaged these students were and how, back and forth our conversation was going, I decided it was best not to do that. So I actually didn't go exactly with my original lesson plan. So I asked them some leading questions and, said, what are some kind phrases? And they had answers for me. I had some answers sort of built, things like that I knew I could say to get them started, but they didn't need it. So they started with like, do you want to play? Or, thank you, yes, that kind of thing. And then the next question I asked after what are some kind phrases is, why should you learn sign language? Who needs sign language? What's the advantage of sign language? And again, they were very engaged and involved in the conversation. So it started, obviously they answered, deaf people use it. Why should you learn it? Is, because everybody, needs to communicate. But they had such a range of answers that I really didn't have to prompt them and say things like, everybody can use it and it's not just deaf people, because they knew, or they sort of came up with that on their own, which I found very interesting, in terms of like the kids' response to my questions. They were higher level thinking. And so I asked them, why is it important for you as hearing children who can, or verbal, why is it important to learn sign language? And that one was a little bit harder for them to sort of answer. So I explained to them that it's very easy for everybody to learn, but not everybody can learn to speak. And so it's a inclusive language. And then I asked them what inclusive meant, and they were like, everybody's involved, which was great. And we sort of went over what an inclusive environment looks like and why it's important, and how speaking kindly to one another creates an inclusive environment, and then how also signing can create an inclusive environment within their classroom, within their grade, within their school, that kind of thing. And then after that, I taught them the alphabet because they were dying to learn the alphabet. So I taught them the alphabet so that they could sign their names. And then I taught them goodbyes, that kind of thing. So I was like, we went back over, it's nice to meet you. We went over goodbye, we went over thank you, we went over clapping. And then finally I went over main message of it, which is just spread kindness, because it's super easy to spread kindness, and I can build everybody up, and if you build everybody up, it makes everybody feel better and stronger. And it was nice because they were super engaged in what I was talking about. I didn't feel like I was just preaching at them, that kind of thing. I didn't ever talk about, though, don't bully. I never said don't bully. I never said, don't use mean words, because I wanted it to be about the importance of kindness, not the importance of not bullying. So because I think that they get a lot of the negative side, and I really wanted it to be a positive lesson about how to build everybody up and get them excited for inclusivity, and being kind to one another, because it was such an important time, especially when I taught the lesson, just with everything going on in the news. I just wanted it to be clear to them that, you learn two things. You learn the sign language, that side, and then you learn the importance that kindness brings, and together what they can do, and what that generation of kids can do, that kind of thing. And then I answered some questions about sign language at Whitman, and then my time was up because I only had 30 minutes in the classroom. So I only had one class the first day. And then the second day I had two classes, and the first class pretty much went the exact same as the class I just explained. And then the second class was a special education class. And so there was, 8 students with a range of disabilities. So we've got some kids who are probably on the spectrum, to a child who had earphones in and really wasn't processing what I was saying, and everything in between. There was just a very large array of abilities and disabilities in the room. And so I didn't know going into it that I was going to be teaching a special education class. Nobody had said anything, and I had not pre-adopted my lesson to that, but I had sort of worked through with my best buddy, just because I knew that there are kids in the classroom, so I didn't know I was going to be working with a certain class. I knew that there were students in the classrooms that were a little bit developmentally behind, so I had worked sort of on that. But going into it, I knew I was going to have to tailor my lesson. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to really teach the alphabet, because I wanted it to, I could have taught the same lesson, right, but they wouldn't have absorbed it the same way, and I really wanted it to be something that was important to them still and that they could understand, and I'd rather them learn 20 signs and understand the lesson and really be able to feel like they know what went on, what I was talking about, learned the signs, really remember the signs, get it down. I'd rather them be able to do that than go through the lesson and then walk out that door and have nothing sink in. And so I started out the same way. I started with greetings. But then after the greetings, I taught them more. I prompted more of what are some kind phrases. I gave them examples, and then I asked them what are their responses to them. So I said things like, do you want to play? And then I asked them for their response, so that it was still back and forth conversation, but it was sort of more me prompting what are some kind phrases, teaching them the kind phrases, and having them answer it, and then teaching them the answers. The other thing that was different about this class is there were a lot more questions in the lesson that weren't really to do with the lesson, and so I'd get a lot of questions about signs that weren't really related to my lesson, but I sort of rolled with it and went with it and answered their questions, because, again, I'd rather them learn as much as they can, and what they want to learn, right, because I wanted it to be fun for them, for all of the students. So I answered all their questions, and then we went over the importance of having everybody included, and we talked a little bit about what does it feel like to be included, what does it feel like to not be included, why speak nicely, why that can affect somebody, how it affects them, how could it affect their friends who uses sign language. We talked a little bit about that. They had some really good answers for that. So that part was the same. I didn't teach them the alphabet. At the end of the lesson, we went back over all of the greeting signs, and then we went over the goodbye signs. But because everything took a little bit longer, just because we went over it a lot more times, that lesson didn't include the alphabet, and it was a little bit different, but it was really fun. And it was, you just have to roll with it. So when they ask you questions, it's important to like know sign language when you're teaching this, because you need to be able to answer their questions with the right signs. And it was really fun, and I got to know, because it was such a small class, I got to know individually what students, liked, and we went over like, who had pets in the class, that kind of thing. Just because it's a smaller class and the engagement was different. It was just a very different experience. So then the next day I had my final 2 classes. They went pretty much the exact same. The kids in my last class had actually learned some of my signs from the kids in my first class, which was super exciting, because that's sort of what I wanted, right? I wanted them to be talking to each other and teaching each other, and who remembers this and who doesn't remember this. So they'd known some of my signs. And so we did greetings again, and then we went through pretty much the exact same thing, but we had more time to answer people's questions, and we had more time for them to engage with each other. So there was more time for them to sign their names to each other and sign greetings to each other, that kind of thing, which was nice to be able to walk around and watch them interacting and taking my lesson and talking to someone new and signing with someone new. And I had them sign with the person next to them, and then I made them stand up and walk around and find somebody new. But I think that it sort of went with the lesson of everybody should be included, and there should be, everybody in the classroom should have somebody to talk to. And it was really nice to get to see them talking to each other and including everybody, and just, it was really fun to watch. The kids picked up the signs really well. So that was great. When I was done, I sent out a letter to Mr. Morrison, David Morrison, who is my sort of teacher liaison, to send to the parents. And the letter I will attach at the end. But it was basically just explaining what my project was, explaining what I taught their kids, and just thanking, the teachers, that kind of thing. Told them to let me know if they had any questions. I never heard back from any of them, so I guess nobody had any questions. I did hear, though, after my first lesson, I got an email from Mr. Byrne, who was the teacher in the classroom I taught first. And he sent me a letter or an email from one of the parents. It was just about how much the lesson meant to her and how great it was. Which was really nice to hear, because I didn't know, right? I had no idea how well it went. I liked it, but and so it was also talking about how excited she was to learn sign language, and I really liked that, because sort of I wanted to pass on the love for sign language that I have to a bunch of students. It's really nice to know that these kids all now have a basis of sign language, which could, spark excitement and want to learn sign language in the future for other kids. And so it's nice to hear from a parent that their kid liked it, that it went well, because I wasn't really sure, and also because it was after my first lesson, so you're never really sure. So I sent the letter to Mr. Morrison to be sent off, and then I never heard from any of the parents, so I assume it went well. And then I made posters for the classrooms, because if there's one thing those kids were really gonna forget, but also probably the most important thing for them to have learned, was the alphabet. And so I made them these posters I made 5 of them for all 5 of the classrooms. They took a little while to make, so I'd recommend watching a TV show while you're making them, because they're tedious. And so they're basically just alphabet posters with the letters in sign language. And then I dropped those off at Burning Tree, and I went through my lesson, how it went with my project advisor and my principal. I explained to him how it went, and that was pretty much it. And then, yeah. So overall, it was a really, really great thing. The experience of it was really fun. I really liked teaching the kids. I really loved the difference in each classroom, but also the similarity between all of the students. I like the impact after seeing, students while I was walking through their classrooms, getting to the other 5th grade classrooms. I'd have students come up to me and sign, hi, how are you? And that was really cool to get to see that, oh, these kids from the first class I taught remember as I go into my last class I teach. And to have the opportunity to go into a classroom and teach at this age when I'm not, a teacher or anything, it was really cool. And yeah, that was all. When you're teaching the alphabet, it's important that you do it in chunks, and then you go back to the beginning, and then you go back to the beginning again, and then you go back to the beginning of the chunk, and then you go back and back, so that you're really making sure that they've learned it, because kids will tend to forget what you've taught them if you just go all the way through. So you want to go, A, B, C, D, and then go back to the beginning, and then, do F and E, F, G, H, I, J, K. Go through those 3 times, and then go back to the beginning and start with A. Also you sign with them, right, and then make them sign it back to you. So say, can you do it once without me? And then have them sign it without you, that kind of thing. And go slowly, because kids have a hard time differentiating things like D and F. So just make sure you're going slowly enough where they can pick it up, if you plan on teaching them the alphabet, because it's something that it takes a little bit more time. After I taught them the alphabet, I made sure that everybody knew how to at least spell their name, because I thought that that's something that they just want to know, because kids really like to know their own name in sign language, and so that they could answer, what's your name? They could answer it. So after I taught them the alphabet, I had them pair up, and I said, can you say, what's your name, and then sign your name, because they may not remember everything you taught them. They may not remember all of the alphabet, but at least then, if they know your name, most of the kids picked up all of the alphabet. But then if they know at least their name, they feel accomplished in their own right. It's about boosting up them, as well as making sure that they've learned it. Part about not about why we sign, as well as some of the kindness part, but a lot about the deaf community, the community you can create when signing. That was all done verbally. That was all through just me prompting them questions. I said things like, who signs? Why would you sign? That kind of thing. So that was all done verbally. I didn't sign that with them, just because I thought that I'd rather them be engaged in the lesson that I'm talking about at that point, than trying to also learn the signs. So that, and then part of the kindness, it just depended. So when I'd answer their questions, or I'd, ask them things like, what are some kind phrases, and I teach them the phrases, and I teach them the answers, that kind of thing. That was all sign language, because it's kinesthetic and I wanted them to remember it. But sort of the importance of why it's important to be kind, that kind of thing, that was all verbal. So what I have attached, what I have at the end, where it's me sort of going through, those are some of the phrases I taught, some of the things the kids came up with. I wrote them down, and those are some of the ones. There was a lot of them. I taught 5 classes, and each class came up with 20 or 30 different phrases, and so that's definitely not all of them, but that's just some examples of sort of things they came up with. But it's all about prompting them to come up with them, because then they're interested in it, and so making sure that they're interested in what you're talking about, and that really comes from them talking. Also getting them talking to each other, talking to new people, getting the teacher involved. Bathroom and water I taught so that the teacher could learn it. Ready, that was another big one. I taught it to the teacher and to the students so that it's something that they could use every day. Ready, bathroom, that's all everyday sign language. And so I taught them that as well, even though it's not necessarily about kindness. Still thought it was important for them to learn.